Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richman, the foundation's vice president. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show that, as you know, brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. And Sheldon, one of the burning issues is the big elections, man, where we're all supposed to be celebrating because the conservatives, the Republicans, are back in power in Congress. How many times have we gone through this with this game of musical chairs where all of a sudden the Republicans are smashed and the Democrats take over and there's going to be massive change in America. And now, you know, the Republicans are back in office because people are dissatisfied with President Obama. I mean, it's just the same old game of musical chairs, and really nothing ever changes. You see this massive amount of money that has gone into this electoral campaign. And for what? So that one side can control the levers of power and secure the largesse that comes from the welfare warfare state for their cronies? Seems to me that that's what it's all about. What do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be the same, only more so, I like to say. I think we're going to have John McCain as chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. That shouldn't thrill the hearts of libertarians or peace lovers or freedom lovers. He's the old bomb Iran guy. And speaking of Iran, with now the Senate in control of the Republicans in control of the Senate and wanting to score points on Obama, presumably, it makes it harder to become optimistic that Obama will really see through the process of coming to some settlement with Iran to defuse that, 30-year plus Cold War over a bogus nuclear issue. The Senate Republicans have been railing against him anyway, and now that they'll be in charge of the Senate in January, we can look for more roadblocks because the Congress will have to undo sanctions, which is supposed to be part of the deal, ease those crippling sanctions on the Iranian people. And now with the House and Senate in the hands of the Republicans, that might be tougher because Obama might have been more persuasive with Democrats in the Senate, but he's not going to be more persuasive with Republicans in the Senate. So there's nothing to celebrate about this victory.
Yeah, I'm not so convinced that he would have done anything about Iran anyway, because I don't think the national security establishment, the Pentagon and the CIA would have permitted him to do it anyway. And if you want to talk about sanctions and embargoes, look at Cuba. I mean, here this guy, Obama's had 6 years to move America in a slightly different direction. He announces before he gets into office he's going to close the Pentagon, the CIA's torture and prison camp at Guantanamo. He still hasn't done that, and we all know that's not going to happen in the next 2 years. But here you've got this 50-year-old embargo against the Cuban people that operates as a vice with their socialist system that squeezes the lifeblood out of the Cuban people. And for what purpose? It's all about, this, in my opinion, is rooted in the Pentagon's and the CIA's humiliation at the Bay of Pigs. They've never gotten over it. And so they're not going to permit any president or any Congress to lift that embargo. I think that's the real power center of this country. And now that the Republicans are in, there's absolutely no chance at all, because they've been in this anti-communist mindset ever since the partnership between the United States and the Soviet communists during World War II came to an end. So, yeah, I don't see much hope in this at all. There's no difference with respect to the welfare state. Republicans have always supported the welfare state. They're going to continue supporting it. They're going to support minimum wage laws. They're going to support the drug war. In fact, I think all of the gains that have been made at the federal level on the drug war, where they're talking about lower sentencing and so forth, are now in jeopardy with the Republicans in office, because hope springs eternal for them there. And on the warfare state, we can all see it coming. They're going to be pressuring Obama to drop more bombs, to attack more countries, to engage in more coups with the hopes of establishing this worldwide hegemony for the national security establishment.
Yeah, I agree. We're likely to see more, belligerence coming out of the Senate now, certainly over Iraq and Syria, where they don't believe that Obama is doing enough. I mean, it's pretty much a universal opinion now that the Obama strategy is, just at its core, an incoherent losing strategy. No one. I don't know that anybody really thinks it could work. I mean, a few spokesmen in the administration keep their brave face on, but if you look at commentators from kind of all sides, no one can even make sense of it. Here they're supposed to be defeating the Al Qaeda affiliate in Syria and ISIS, and also attack Assad and unseat Assad. All three things, even though those things are in conflict, with whom? Without U.S. ground troops. That's the promise. So in other words, they're trying to train up a few thousand over a year, a few thousand Syrian rebels, and no one has any confidence in the Syrian rebels. Meanwhile, in Iraq, it's working with the Shiite government, which is apparently no different from Maliki, the former Maliki government. The Iraqi government doesn't even want to arm the Sunnis in Anbar province against ISIS. It's a totally incoherent policy. I don't know what the Republicans are going to propose. 50,000, 100,000 troops, maybe. That's the only thing. If you want to one-up Obama, you're going to have to move in that direction. Obama's already planning to double the number of ground troops, which they call advisors, in Iraq. So it's totally incoherent, but the Republicans can't say that because they got to be the tough guys. And so they're going to be doubling down and pushing Obama to have a more direct military involvement in those two countries. That's totally insane. We've ventured now into a very old sectarian war between Sunnis and Shiites, mostly on the Shiite side, and it's total ridiculousness. It's insanity, and the Republicans don't think it goes nearly far enough. They think Obama's a wimp. So yeah, what can we do but put our faces in our palms and moan and groan? I don't know what to do.
I'll tell you what we do. We keep showing people, one, that this is totally antithetical to a free society. So if you want freedom, you're not going to have it as long as this apparatus stays in existence. And so, that you can elect as many Republicans as you want, and that's only going to make matters worse. Because I totally agree with you. I mean, we can see it coming. Notice how this game works. The first 2 years of the president's administration, everything's geared to, regaining control over Congress. Well, now the game is already starting with the presidential race. So we're going to see that ridiculous process starting to play out where people are starting to maneuver and who's going to announce and who's going to put an exploratory committee and where are the millions of dollars of people's hard-earned money going to go into now, which PAC, which candidate. And all of this is going to be centered around how weak Obama is. He's a weak president. He hasn't dropped as many bombs as John McCain would have dropped, and so everything's going to be orienting around being more tough and getting the national security establishment more money, more tax money, borrowing more money. So if anything, things are obviously going to get worse at a political level. And it seems to me that the only thing we can do is to continue painting this picture of what a free society is. And the free society necessarily involves the absence of this giant national security establishment, this giant standing army, the CIA. I mean, did you see where the revelations in the CIA, maybe we talked about this last week, I can't recall. The CIA, it turns out, has been hiring was hiring Nazis and after World War II, and not just Nazi scientists, but people who had participated in the Holocaust. And notice the advantage of secrecy here. They keep it secret for decades, and by the time it's revealed, the mainstream press is just, what's the big deal? It's a long time ago. It's ancient history. That's the advantage of keeping all these things secret. And I think this is the type of thing we need to keep reminding people as libertarians that this has nothing to do with a moral society, has nothing to do with a free society. If you want those kind of things, libertarianism is the only answer. If you don't care about freedom and you like to live your life as a serf, just continue supporting all this stuff. You'll get what you want just by supporting the bombing and the overseas troops and the overseas bases and the interventions and the coups and the partnerships with dictators. And No, well, let me throw it back to you. I had one more point about partnerships with dictators, but go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that there was a revelation about the CIA that's much more recent than World War II and Nazis, namely the cult of the working with terrorist groups. I mean, groups that the U.S. government itself regarded as terrorists, of Iranians against the Islamic Republic's government, the Jundallah. That revelation came out over the weekend, where the CIA was in close contact with members of Jundallah, which are Iranians who live on, I think, the border area, who are against the Ayatollah regime and have committed terrorism against it. And also, as we knew from past revelations, the U.S. has worked with this MEK, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, which is also an Iranian group, which actually sided with Iraq when Saddam Hussein attacked Iran. And is a sort of a Marxist cult, sort of a crazy cult that is engaged in violence against the Iranian government. And the U.S. officials and former officials, cuddled up to these people, spoke at their dinners and made big bucks. And it was a little embarrassing because for a while, up until recently, it was on the terrorist list. So you had people like Ed Rendell, former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Howard Dean, and other people, speaking at their events. These people could have been indicted for aiding and abetting terrorism, giving material support. So what the government quickly did was, this was, I think, when Hillary was still Secretary of State, was to take them off the terrorist list. And all these people then got away without any investigation. I think they briefly investigated Rendell. So the coziness with outright terrorist groups, the State Department regarded as terrorists, against Iran, is atrocious, is scandalous, and it's more and more coming out. But there's that kind of stuff going on all over the place. The U.S. government is a rogue government. The American people have to understand that what they call their government is the biggest rogue government in the world. It puts any other so-called rogue government to shame.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because especially with respect to the CIA, because there's this quaint little notion that the CIA is just one agency, that by and large we have a limited government, and the only agency that has unlimited power is the CIA, but it's only one agency, and it operates in secret, and Americans don't really know what it's doing, so it's all okay. Well, that's all fallacious. The U.S. government is the CIA. It is an omnipotent government. It's a totalitarian government, because as long as you have one agency that has unlimited power, then that's unlimited government. You don't have to have the whole government have unlimited powers. All you need to have is one section of the government have unlimited powers. Then the rest of the government essentially becomes a support unit. It's like in an army, that the point of the spear, the infantryman at the front lines, he's where the force is being imposed, and the rest of the army is in support. That's precisely what's going on with the CIA. I mean, they have unlimited powers. They're doing these things, partnerships with terrorist groups and so forth. And I recently, last week, I went and saw this movie, Kill the Messenger, which is absolutely a fantastic movie. I mean, I highly recommend it. And it's about this guy, Gary Webb, a journalist for a small newspaper in California, that disclosed, I can't remember exactly when, maybe in the 70s or so, that the CIA was involved with cooperating with supporting the Contras, who, knowing that the Contras were over there selling crack cocaine into the black communities in Los Angeles and other cities in the United States. Well, one of the funniest parts of the thing, at least to me, was the indignancy shown by the CIA. I dare you accuse us of this. And the CIA went after Webb, and the mainstream press went after him. And the poor guy got run out. His editors abandoned him, sort of denounced the work he had done. The guy ends up committing suicide. And I don't know all the details involved in it, but on the leftist websites, Counterpunch and so forth, they say the guy was right, but it's an ongoing controversy. Some of the mainstream press is attacking him and still saying that he wasn't right. But what I found amusing about the CIA's position was there's sort of this inconceivable doctrine that it's inconceivable that we would do anything that bad. Here's the organization that obviously didn't give a hoot about countless Jews getting killed in the Holocaust because they not only hired the guys that killed the Jews, they protected them from criminal prosecution, according to this article in the New York Times. They engage in medical experimentation, just like the Nazis did, in their MK Ultra operations, where they end up destroying all the records when it comes to light, so the American people can't find out about it. And so all of a sudden they have some kind of moral reservations about, we really couldn't get involved in the drug trade. How ridiculous is that?
Yeah, well, we actually do know a lot about this. This goes back to Iran-Contra, so it happened originally in the Reagan years in the 80s. And Robert Parry, who runs the consortium news, very good news website, when he was, I believe, an AP reporter, I think it was AP, he started first uncovering the connection between the Contras and the drug trade and the CIA. Then 10 years later, in the 90s, Gary Webb, who was working for the San Jose Mercury News, which is not one of the biggest papers, but it's also not a small minor paper in Northern California, he got onto the story and developed this very specific idea that the Contras and their connection that brought the cocaine and crack into the U.S., L.A. especially, was getting a pass from law enforcement due to the CIA. In other words, they were looking the other way. There was one L.A. drug kingpin, who somehow never got touched by law enforcement. And so Webb developed a story that, on the basis of solid reporting, that this was because the CIA was protecting this whole operation because they wanted money to go to the Contras, which was fighting the Nicaraguan government. You're right. The whole journalism profession, especially the New York Times, the Washington Post, disparaged the reporting of Webb and made life hell. And then his editors backed away and did an infamous editorial about how he had gotten beyond his evidence or something like along those lines. However, not long after that, the CIA, I guess the Inspector General, issued a report which confirmed a great deal of it. So there wasn't simply a denial that this was inconceivable. They confirmed a good bit of it. So it's anything later evidence now shows that Webb didn't go nearly far enough. And you're right, he was basically driven to suicide. He was a total outcast. They reassigned him to some insignificant beat. He was shown complete disrespect by the whole journalism establishment. His story, by the way, also figures in a very good documentary that I think came out last year called Shadows of Liberty, which is about how the corporate media is basically does the bidding of the ruling class and the government. It's a very good documentary that I recommend, and he figures in it. He did a lot of TV interviews in those days, and there are clips from those interviews in this documentary. So if I have not yet seen Kill the Messenger. I want to see that. That of course is a dramatization of his story. But after seeing that, it probably is a good idea then to look up this documentary and see Gary Webb himself and Robert Parry and other people talking about his very, very sad case.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that because I was absolutely fascinated by this movie, Kill the Messenger. It's just absolutely great. I mean, it goes to show you what happens to a journalist that takes on some entity as powerful as the CIA. And I don't think there's any entity more powerful than the CIA. I mean, they have essentially immunity to do whatever they want to do. They go out and assassinate an American citizen. Nothing's going to happen to them. They go into different countries and kidnap people. Nothing's going to happen to them. And I started to raise earlier when we were talking about foreign policy that many of these regimes that the U.S. ends up ousting, the U.S. government was partnering with before that. And the classic example, of course, is Saddam Hussein. I mean, they were a partner of Saddam, and you and I have talked about, them finding these canisters of WMDs. Those were the canisters, they're all rusted out and so forth, of chemical weapons that the United States furnished Saddam so that he could use them to kill Iranians. And then you later, as part of the Iran-Contra deal, you had this scandal where the U.S. was selling arms to their so-called arch enemy to support the Contras, totally illegal. And, of course, all the malefactors end up getting pardoned right when the special prosecutor was getting close to convicting them all or sending them to prison. And then you've got this partnership, which is really still very mysterious to me, with Syria's Assad, where, the U.S. says, oh, we're never going to talk to Assad. He's a brutal dictator. And somehow or another, the CIA ends up making a secret deal with Syrian torturers, the torture section of the government, to torture this guy, Mahar Arar, this Canadian citizen who turned out to be totally innocent. And yet there was absolutely no interest in the mainstream press to ask the CIA, how did you make this deal? Who negotiated it? Did the president know about it? And so you've got this morally bankrupt system that's not going to change with these elections. And that's why we keep emphasizing here. This is not a problem of getting better people in public office. It's a structural problem. It's a systemic problem. And that as long as you have this alien apparatus that never existed in American history, this national security establishment that came into existence supposedly because of the Cold War, but didn't go out of existence with the Cold War, you're going to have this kind of rotten, immoral, anti-freedom type of conduct.
Yeah, I think it goes back way before that. We can look at things like the Alien and Sedition Acts. You certainly see the seeds of it there. I'd like to stress that I don't think there's any evidence that in the case of Iran-Contra or Assad that the CIA was acting outside the knowledge of the regime. I mean, there's no question that Bush Cheney, I think, knew about that and fully would have wanted that. It was part of their whole program, totally consistent with their program. So I think it's the government that's rogue. I think there is a permanent regime, but you don't get to be president unless you're already sort of with the program, because there's too many ways, there's too many stops along the way where your campaign, your aspirations to be president will be derailed if it's known that you're not really with the program. So I think by the time you've taken the oath of office and entered the Oval Office, they're pretty sure you're with the program. So it's the whole government that's rogue. I don't think it's just the CIA. But, yeah, they're up to bad things. We certainly, often don't learn about it until years later. And we might be appalled. I mean, most Americans might be appalled if they were hearing about it on in real time, daily basis. I hope they would be. But the fact is, it's easy to cover it up. And, of course, the media these days, well, it's not just these days, but, if they get a tip about a hot story like this, they're going to call the White House and say, is there any problem if we publish this right away? And as we know, with the New York Times and James Risen and the warrantless wiretapping under Bush, they said, no, it's going to be harmful to the national interest and national security if you do this right away, if you publish this right away. And the New York Times, waited a year? This is the docile press. It's just it's truly the fourth estate. In other words, it's the fourth branch of the government.
Oh yeah, well that's why they hate people like Glenn Greenwald so bad in The Intercept and the people writing there. Is that Greenwald and that bunch doesn't play their game. They see journalism as the way it was supposed to be. A watchdog on the government instead of a lapdog of the government. And that's why they hate them and would love to see them shut down. And then on the political side, look what they did to Ron Paul when he ran. I mean, to keep him out of the debates, marginalize him, try to keep him off the ballot in many instances. I mean, you're absolutely right that everything is oriented to putting one of their people into the presidency and then, all through Congress. And they don't have much problem with that in this Congress. I mean, it just boggles the mind that all these millions of dollars and efforts and energies go into electing these Republicans when actually things either are not going to change at all in terms of a freedom agenda. They're actually going to be worse. Many years ago, I was at a Libertarian conference, and a guy asked me, he says, what do you think is the greatest threat to our freedom? And I didn't hesitate. It's the warfare state. I mean, you and I both got into this because of economics with Mises and Hayek and Austrian economics and economic liberty and principles of economic freedom. But as things have developed, there's no question in my mind that the warfare state is a much graver threat to the freedom of the American people. And that's why we keep stressing things like civil liberties. I mean, you brought up the Alien and Sedition Acts. It'd be easy for them to do the exact same thing. All they need is the right crisis. Hey, but in the few minutes we have left, your TGIF last Friday talked about one of the heretical acts in the so-called democratic system we have in America. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about that?
Well, we like to think we're a secular society, but we're actually, we labor under a civic religion, a very fairly strict civic religion known as democracy. And you're not allowed to kid about it. If you kid about it, you're in trouble, even if you're a professional kidder. And of course, we're thinking of Jon Stewart here and his nightly show, The Daily Show. He's probably considered America's premier political satirist, but and his hero is George Carlin, who was truly a great satirist and a social commentator in the tradition and spirit of Lenny Bruce and many other people who came before him, Dick Gregory. But Stewart is a pale imitation. In fact, I don't think he deserves to be in the category. Someone said he's not a comedian; he's a court jester. He got in trouble on election day. He was being interviewed by Christiane Amanpour of CNN, the woman I call our Secretary of War, because she has a great say on where we go to war just by what she decides to put on the air. Anyway, she was interviewing him, and she said to him, "Did you vote today?" And he said, "No, I just moved, and I don't know. I didn't know where my the polls were," which isn't exactly a satirical point. It might actually be a decent excuse, if you needed one, for not voting. You just moved into the place, and usually you can't register that soon. So it wasn't even a flip or satirical remark. But she acted scandalized. No, you didn't vote. And they ended up talking about this on CNN. It became, as Stewart put it, a bit of a story, which means other people were commenting about it. Can you imagine? People were commenting about this. He then had to go on his show that night, which is at 11 p.m. Eastern weeknights, and apologize. I was sorry, he said, for making light of something so important as voting. I was flip, he said. And my reaction was, you do flip for a living. You have to tell us? Or your producer's now going to have to put under the screen, like right here, JK, you know how they do on the internet, J/K, just kidding? Are they now going to have to flash that every time he makes a statement? Because we don't know if he's kidding. After all, he's only Jon Stewart, who is on Comedy Central. I mean, it's in the name. He had to grovel. But this is not the first time. 5 years ago, in an interview with a neoconservative named Cliff May, he called Harry Truman a war criminal because of the atomic bombings. A true statement, not satire, not humor, an unvarnished truth. Except 3 days later, he apologized, said it was a stupid remark. Of course he didn't mean it, and he's sorry he said it. No explanation about why it was if it was untrue. He never said it was untrue. Maybe it was a stupid remark. Maybe it hurt his career and therefore stupid. He didn't say it was untrue. This is from our so-called major satirist in America. It's a very, very sad commentary that you cannot talk this way without being somehow compelled, I don't know if it was by his corporate masters or who, his ratings, whatever, of going on and groveling. I'm sorry I said that. He's like a court jester. A friend of mine, Rory Calhoun, a very good writer, compared him to a court jester rather than a true comedian who's a social commentator with a bite and with humor. It's a sad thing for American culture.
Well, it is a religion. I mean, people worship the government. They don't like to put it that way, but it's really been erected as an idol. It can do no wrong. We're going to see paeans to that tomorrow on Veterans Day, and praise the military, and thank goodness for the military. They keep us safe. I mean, this is their God, including the Christians, who really, for all practical purposes, look to the federal government and the national security establishment and the military as another God. But on the voting side, I can't help but think of Walter Williams' great story. You know, Williams is a professor of economics at George Mason University here in Virginia. And he tells this story where he was walking out in his neighborhood, and his next door neighbor says, "Professor Williams, who are you voting for?" And he says, "I don't vote." And she goes into this indignant tirade of, "How dare you? What do you mean you don't vote? This is your duty. This is your right. Why are you not exercising it?" And he says, "Well, I do other things to influence the course of America. I have a syndicated column. I teach classes. I substitute host for Rush Limbaugh." And she says, "Oh, that's just terrible. What would you do everybody took this position and did not vote. Williams looked at her and says, well, then I'd vote. Sort of indicating that, one vote doesn't make any difference anyway. The fact that the possibility that you're going to influence an election is infinitesimally small. Of course, you've written a lot about this.
As Gordon Tullock put it, and you can look up his video. He's got a good video online. Gordon Tullock, who just died recently, unfortunately, a very good economist, a friend of freedom, put it, you have a better chance of getting killed on the way to the polls than to influence the outcome. By the way, I must make one quick correction. I called my friend Rory Calhoun, who's a famous actor from long ago. His name, the person I was referring to, is Ryan Calhoun. I want to get that on the record. But that's right. The chance of affecting the outcome of any significant election. Sure, if you live in a tiny town, the chances of a tie and then one vote mattering are greater. But in any significant jurisdiction, and certainly in a presidential election, and don't forget, in a congressional, I think the average congressional district is at least 300,000 votes. It may be more than that. So we're talking about big jurisdictions. One vote is like a drop in the ocean. And the idea that every vote counts, and that just shows you how little respect all these pundits and politicians have for the American people, because they constantly are telling you every vote counts, every vote counts. I hadn't voted since 1980. I guarantee there's no election that would have been different had I done something differently that day. I mean, this is ridiculous. I know for a fact that no election would have been different. Well, so how does every vote count?
Yeah, and people have this notion that it's okay to vote for the lesser of two evils with respect to Republicans and Democrats. I can't see ever voting for the lesser of two evils. I mean, you're still voting for something that is fundamentally wrong, and that gets us back to what we're talking about. These elections are just somebody called it an advanced auction in stolen goods. It's about money and power. Mencken said that.
That was H.L. Mencken.
All right. I mean, that's all. Yeah. That's all it is. It's about money and power. And so now the Republicans are in, and boy, they get, some of the largesse now, some of the grants, some of the privileges, the tax benefits. It's just a crooked, corrupt system. And that the only real solution to this thing is to take away their money, abolish the income tax, as you and I have often said, abolish the Federal Reserve, deprive them of this lifeblood that they're fighting over, and leave people free to keep their own money and decide what to do with it. Anyway, we're out of time. That's a Libertarian Angle for this week. I'm Jacob Hornberger, joined by Sheldon Richmond, and we'll see you next time.